This is Roger Simon. Today we have a special guest, Danny Ayalon, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Israel. In the past, he has served as the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and the foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Danny, thank you for joining us and welcome back to PJTV. What brings you again to the United States?
Well, thank you, Roger. Always good to be here with you. You know, life goes on. Although we have elections on the 22nd of January, that's very soon. There is a new administration here, but still we have the challenges that they're not waiting for elections here or in Israel. So we have to continue and coordinate our policy vis-a-vis Iran, Palestinians, the so-called Arab Spring. So I'm going to be in Washington for a few days, and of course here, meeting some friends, doing some lectures, and coming here to your studio.
Well, thank you very much. Now, apropos of the elections that are coming up on the 22nd, I believe, to American audiences, they're a little confusing because there are how many political parties now in Israel?
About 42.
42? And we're stuck with 2 and a lot of some minor ones. Now, I've been reading that lately this party, Bayit Yehudi, is on the rise in the polls. What does this mean about the Israeli electorate at this point?
Well, you see, the Israeli electorate sentiment is really moving to the right with, I think, more sober expectations towards the future. Two things that happened that made Israelis being more skeptical about peace with the Palestinians at this point. One is, of course, the Intifada, after the most generous offers that Israel gave the Palestinians. They came out killing more than 1,000 Israelis, 7,000 injured. Second thing is the consistent refusal of the Palestinians to come, to step up to the plate, to the table, and negotiate with us. And instead of negotiating, they go on unilateral track, like the UN resolution for a Palestinian state, which is a virtual one, but still, it tells the Israelis that really we do not have a partner right now. So the response is that the Israelis say, well, we need a tougher foreign policy and we need to shore up our defenses, especially after what happened 2 months ago in Gaza, with more than 15,000 rockets raining on our civilian population. So it seems like there is a shift to the right, and to the extent that I can predict the future, it will be so until and unless we find a trustworthy partner on the Palestinian side.
So does this mean that the Oslo process, as it's commonly called, is sort of over and finished?
Well, I would say that by the Palestinians going to the UN, they pretty much slammed the door shut on the Oslo or on a meaningful process for the time being, because what was the deal of Oslo? The deal of Oslo was that Israel gave them a prepayment, an advance payment, 42% of the West Bank they got. With actually, this 42% houses 98% of all Palestinians under the Palestinian Authority rule. Gaza, 100% of Gaza was given to the Palestinians in 2005. The deal was, you get this advance payment, and in return, not only you have to stop terror and recognize Israel, but they committed not to go on unilateral moves and have only a negotiated solution and settlement. So what happened? Not only that they did not stop terror and killing Israelis with the Intifada and with terror from Gaza, they also are going to the UN on a unilateral move. So in a way, everything now is put on hold. Again, we are waiting for a Palestinian partner to be more reasonable.
Now, you're headed for Washington in a couple of days. You were telling me you're right in the middle of a firestorm that's occurring, the nomination of Chuck Hagel for Secretary of Defense, who is not known to be a friend of Israel, and also seems to be, skeptical about the use of force against the Iranians. What will be the Israeli position in dealing with Hagel, and how will this
Well,
unfold?
I beg to differ about any wrong sentiments about Hagel. I know Hagel. I've known him for many years. When I was ambassador in Washington, we had very good and many good meetings. Of course, we don't see eye to eye on everything, but I think he's a decent guy. He's a patriotic American, and I have no doubt that we will find him as a friend of Israel, as a supporter of the natural alliance between Israel and the United States. And of course, the defense relations between Israel and the United States have never been so good as they have been in the last 4 years. And the challenges are such that it dictates a very, very close cooperation. So the dealing of Iran, international terrorism, extremism, all these issues we will confront together.
Well, it seems that Israel is surrounded as never before because Egypt is now a Muslim Brotherhood country, essentially. Syria, what's the best outcome you can see for Syria? Is there a good outcome?
Well, it's unfortunate. I am shocked at the helplessness of the international community. What could have been done maybe a year and a half ago with fairly modest means today is impossible. And unfortunately, Assad is going down. We know that. I cannot tell you whether it will be tomorrow or in a year from now, but he is going down. But this protracted slaughter and civil war, in effect, actually is bringing the entire country down with him. And what I see for Syria, unfortunately, is continued war and violence, sectarian violence, where Syria can even split into 2 or 3 or even 4 different regions based on ethnic or religion bases. The Alawis, the Sunni, the Kurds, the Druze, and the challenge for all of us will be to make sure that what happens in Syria will not spill over to Lebanon and even to Iraq.
Well, I noticed that Israel is building a fence on the Golan. It's almost a breakneck pace. We've seen photos in the papers and so forth here. Is this going
to? We have to actually prepare ourselves for the future, and with the lack of any central regime or central control in Damascus. By the way, our border with Syria has been the quietest border since 1974 because there was deterrence vis-a-vis Damascus and vis-a-vis the Assad family, the father and son. But if Assad is gone, and we have to assume that he will be gone at some point, who will take over, we do not know. The opposition is very much split. There are some good people in the opposition, real liberal forces, but unfortunately there are also Al-Qaeda types and the very extreme Islamists. And I'm afraid that they will have the upper hand because they have the weapons and they have the control on the ground. So for this reason, we have to beef up border security, and we will complete that very soon.
A few years ago, maybe less, I noticed something that you were proposing in the papers, that you were associated with an idea that Jewish refugees from the Arab countries should get restitution in a similar manner the Palestinians have always been asking for it from Israel. What has happened with that proposal of yours, and where is it going?
Well, the issue of Jewish refugees has been forgotten for too long, unfortunately. And people, when they talk about refugees in the Middle East, they assume immediately Arab or Palestinian refugees. But there were more Jewish refugees as a result of the wars that the Arabs forced on Israel from 48, 56, 67, and 73 than there were ever Palestinian refugees in 1948. And there's also a big difference. The Palestinian refugees were a result of the Arab aggression against Israel. And also some of them used weapons against their neighbors in Israel. So either they left on their own accord or they were moved because of violence that they created. The Jewish refugees in Arab countries were law-abiding citizens for thousands of years, 2,500 years. The Jewish communities throughout the Middle East predated the Islamic occupation of the Middle East, which started in the 7th century. So it is wrong to assume that you can bring settlement to the refugees only on one side, the Arab side. It has to be on equal footing also with the Jewish refugees. I have raised the issue for the first time that Israel did it officially, both in Geneva, in the United Nations Refugees Organization, and also in New York. And the model should be just as Israel received the Jewish refugees and settled them, and today they're part of the society. That should be the model for the Arab refugees, which unfortunately were not well received. They were kept in subhuman conditions. Until now, they do not have citizenship, whether it's in Syria or in Lebanon, so they are not privy to, or they don't have any access to the social security and all the other services of the state. And this is wrong. There is no precedent in history. After World War I, World War II, there were millions of European refugees moving from one place to another. There isn't a case where they were not adopted and assimilated in the places that they were. So we hope that the model of how Israel treated Jewish refugees, that the Arab world should treat the Palestinian refugees. And once there is a settlement, and I believe that there won't be a settlement with the Palestinians without settling the refugee problem, once there is a settlement, either through a mega international fund, by the way, President Clinton suggested already in 2000 in Camp David, creating an international fund to redress and compensate the refugees, which means on both sides of the divide, Jewish and Arabs.
On a totally different subject, I know Americans who follow Israeli politics, I do, and a number of our viewers do, sometimes see Israeli politics as being, maybe we're wrong, more corrupt than our own, and we see corruption in our own. You have been in the middle of a recent scandal in which you've obviously given some testimony against Avigdor Lieberman. What do you think accounts for this view of Israeli politics, and how would you counsel this?
First of all, I'm very, very proud of the American also, but the Israeli legal system. And I would say that among democratic countries, we are probably the least corrupt. The fact that everything is flushed out is also a testimony of how robust the legal system is, where there is no intimidation even with the most powerful. You know, we have indicted a prime minister, former prime minister. We have indicted and prosecuted a former president. And the fact that there are no hidden places in Israeli politics, I think, is really a good sign. I'm not very proud of some rotten apples in the system, but at least we flush them out and we take good measure against it. About Avigdor Lieberman, since his case is standing in court, I don't think I can say, I'm not at liberty to say anything, except we'll have to wait and see what will the judges
the judges will say.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that, Danny Ayalon. Thank you very much
Roger.
again for visiting us here at PJTV.
Pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
This has been Roger Simon for PJTV.